The discovery, music. The vessel in the void, the tavern. Research ship Quantum, observer drifted. Music through a region of space that had no official name, the crew called it. The forgotten expanse, a stretch of emptiness between spiral arms where stars had never formed in darkness. Ruled absolute, Commander Zelith stood in the observation deck, her silver skin reflecting the faint glow of distant galaxies. Her species, the Talver, had mapped 70% of the known universe, yet places like this still existed, places where nothing should be. Her second officer approached with unusual urgency. In his movements, Commander, we have detected something impossible. Zelith turned her large eyes toward him. In her 3 centuries of service, she had learned that impossible simply meant unexpected. Show me, she said calmly. The holographic display materialized between them, showing a massive object suspended in the void. It was enormous, easily 5 km in length, and it was giving off heat signatures that defied logic. Nothing living should exist here. Nothing mechanical should still function after the time required to drift this far from any star system. An ancient guardian, as the Quantum observer approached the true nature of the object, became clear. It was a warship, but unlike anything in the galactic conquered database. The Tavern built their military vessels with grace and efficiency. The ship had neither. Its hull was a fortress of overlapping armor plates, each one scarred with weapons fired from battles fought long ago. Massive cannons protruded from every angle. Launch bays for fighter craft lined the sides like the cells of a hive. Sensor arrays bristled from the superstructure, many damaged but some still transmitting weak signals into the emptiness. Zelith ordered a full analysis. The results came back within the hour, and they made no sense. Ship was 12,000 years old. 12,000 years. The galactic conquered itself had only existed for 8,000 years. Before that, most species had barely achieved space flight, yet this vessel came from an era that predated known galactic civilization. Commander Zelith said quietly, I am leading the boarding team. Personally, prepare the shuttle and assemble a full research squad. I want engineers, historians, and security personnel. We are going inside. Stepping into history. The boarding shuttle approached a damaged section of the hall where ancient battle damage had torn open an access port. The engineering team deployed cutting tools, but they were unnecessary. The moment they touched the outer door, it began to open on its own. Emergency power, whispered one of the engineers. After 12,000 years, it still has emergency power. The team entered through the airlock and lights flickered to life. Along the corridor, dim and red, they created shadows that danced across walls, covered in a language none of them recognized. The air was thin but breathable. Life support systems were still functioning at minimal capacity. Zelith moved forward with her team. Behind her, the corridors were narrow and utilitarian. Every surface showed signs of repair. Welded patches covered hull breaches. Replacement panels had been bolted over damaged sections. Pipes and cables ran exposed along the ceiling, many of them spliced together with materials that did not match. This ship had been hurt badly and often, and each time someone had fixed it with whatever they had available. They found the first crew member in what appeared to be a weapons control room. The body was humanoid in shape, sitting upright at a console with desiccated hands still. Resting on the controls, the uniform had deteriorated to fragments, but a name tag remained. It read Lieutenant Chen, and characters that the translation software struggled to interpret. The crew that never left. As they moved deeper into the vessel, they found more bodies, not scattered in panic, but positioned at their stations. In the medical bay, doctors lay beside the beds where they had treated the wounded. In the engine compartments, engineers sat near the reactors they had kept running. In the command center, the bridge crew remained at their posts, facing forward, as if still watching for enemies that had died millennia ago. Zelith stopped at the captain's chair. The figure seated there was smaller than her species, more delicate in bone structure, but something about the posture spoke of iron determination. One hand gripped a sidearm that had never been fired, the other held a small object that analysis revealed to be a locket containing images of two children. On the wall behind the captain's chair, a symbol had been mounted. It showed a bird of prey with outstretched wings clutching weapons in its talons. Below it, words were engraved in that same unknown language. The translation software worked for several minutes before producing results. Terran Defense Force battle cruiser, eternal vigil. Through sacrifice we endure, Commander, said her science officer, his voice shaking slightly. I believe I have identified the species. The skeletal structure and genetic traces match a member race that joined the Conquered approximately 6,000 years ago. They call themselves humans. Humans in history. Zelith felt confusion wash over her. She knew humans. They were common throughout Conquered space. They worked as merchants and artists, teachers and researchers. They were known for their curiosity and friendliness. They smiled easily and avoided confrontation whenever possible. The Conquered classified them as a peaceful species, valuable for their diplomatic skills and creative thinking. She looked at the bodies positioned at battle stations. She looked at the weapons covering every surface of the ship. She looked at the armor plating, thick enough to withstand direct hits from weapons that should have destroyed any vessel. She looked at the scars that told stories of hundreds of engagements. These were the same species, the friendly traders who sold exotic goods at Conquered markets, the diplomats who always sought peaceful solutions. These warriors who had built a fortress that could fight for 12,000 years. Find the data course, Zelith ordered. I want to know everything. I want to know who they fought, why they fought, and how they survived. I want to know what happened to this ship and its crew. Most of all, I want to know why the humans we know today never told us about this. Archives awaken. It took 4 days to locate the main data cores. They were buried deep within the ship, protected by layers of armor and redundant systems. When the engineering team finally accessed them, they found something remarkable. The data was intact, all of it. 12,000 years of vacuum and radiation had not corrupted a single file. Human engineering, one of the tavern engineers muttered with something approaching awe. They built this to last forever. Zelith gathered her senior staff in a makeshift command center they had established in one of the cargo holds. The holographic display activated and files began scrolling past. Ship logs, personnel records, tactical reports, supply inventories, everything had been meticulously documented. Then they found the personal recordings of the captain. The face that appeared was human, a woman with bronze skin and eyes that held depths of exhaustion. She wore a uniform similar to the remains they had found in the captain's chair. When she spoke, her voice was calm despite the fatigue evident in every line of her face. Captain's log, Commander Talia Jano recording, Day 1 of Operation Sanctuary. We have received confirmed reports of the Krello swarm advancing through the outer colonies. Civilian evacuation has begun. The fleet has been dispersed to protect the refugee convoys. Eternal Vigil has been assigned to Convoy 7. We are escorting 12,000 civilian vessels carrying 4 million souls. Our orders are clear. Get them to safety no matter the cost. The mission begins. Zelith listened as the captain described the situation. The Krello swarm, she knew that name from ancient history. They had been a species of machine intelligences that had swept through this region of space thousands of years ago, consuming everything in their path. They had disappeared suddenly, and historians had never discovered why until now. The logs continued day after day, week after week. Captain Akono documented everything. Her voice remained steady, even as the reports grew increasingly dire. Day 32 made contact with Krello forward elements, 27 vessels. We engaged and destroyed 14 before they withdrew. Convoy 7 remains on course. Casualties 6 crew members. We will hold the line. Day 68. Krill reinforcements have arrived. We now face approximately 100 enemy vessels. Command has ordered us to abandon the convoy and fall back to defensive positions. I have declined these orders. Convoy 7 still has 3 months of travel before reaching safety. We will not leave them. Day 140. The ship has taken significant damage. Forward weapons are offline. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, but we have destroyed 43 Krell vessels. They are learning to fear us. They no longer attack directly. They probe and test and wait for us to make mistakes. We will not make mistakes. A war without end. The records painted a picture of a battle that lasted not weeks or months, but years. The Eternal Vigil fought alone against an enemy that should have destroyed it in the first engagement. But the humans adapted. They modified their tactics. They turned their damaged ship into a weapon more dangerous than it had ever been. When ammunition ran low, they created improvised explosives from fuel and spare parts. When systems failed, they rebuilt them using salvaged components from destroyed Krell vessels. When crew members died, the survivors took on multiple duties, working 18-hour shifts to keep the ship operational. Captain Akwo documented it all. Her voice never wavered, even as the crew dwindled and the ship fell apart around them. Day 409. Lost Chief Engineer Rodriguez. Today, Krell torpedo penetrated the aft engineering section. She sealed the compartment and vented it to space. Before the explosion could spread, her sacrifice saved 200 crew members. We will remember her. Day 637. Convoy 7 has reached the halfway point. We have lost 60% of our crew. The ship operates at 35% capacity, but we have destroyed 91 Krell vessels. Command estimates we have delayed the swarms advance by 8 months. 8 months for other convoys to evacuate. 8 months for more people to reach safety. Final stand. Zelith watched the logs progressed through years of continuous combat. She saw the Eternal Vigil transform from a powerful battle cruiser into a barely functioning wreck held together by determination and improvised repairs. She saw the crew shrink from 2,000 to a few hundred, then to dozens. She saw Captain Akin Kwo age before her eyes, the exhaustion deepening but the resolve never fading. The final entries were dated 12 years after the mission began. Day 4382. Convoy 7 has reached the safe zone. All 12,000 civilian vessels, all 4 million souls, they made it. Captain Akono's voice cracked for the first time. We did it against every probability, against every tactical assessment. We brought them home. There was a long pause. The captain looked directly into the recording device and Zelith could see tears in her eyes. Krell Dreadnought has been detected on intercept course. Analysis indicates it is their command vessel. We have 3 operational weapons and power reserves for maybe 2 more hours. I have ordered the crew to battle stations. We will not run from this fight. We cannot. If the Dreadnought follows us, it will track the convoy. So we end it here. One last time we show them what humanity means. The truth emerges. The final log was brief. Captain Akin Kwo sat in her chair, the ship shaking around her. Krell Dreadnought destroyed. Direct hit on their central processor cost everything. Ship integrity at critical levels. Life support failing. Crew casualties total. But the convoy is safe. 4 million people will live because we chose to stand here, because we refused to abandon them. She reached up and touched the locket around her neck, the one Zelith had found still clutched in her skeletal hand. My children are on one of those ships. I will never see them grow up. But they will grow up. That is enough. This is Captain Talia Akin Kwo of the Terran Defense Force battle cruiser Eternal Vigil signing off. Tell Earth we held the line. Tell them we never broke. Tell them humanity endured. The recording ended. The cargo hold was silent. Zelith realized she was standing rigid, her breath coming in short gasps. Around her, her crew stood motionless. Some were crying, others simply stared at the blank display. They fought for 12 years, her science officer whispered. One ship against an entire swarm, and they won. Zelith found her voice. Copy everything. Every log, every file, every piece of data on this vessel. The Galactic Concord needs to see this. We thought we knew humanity. We welcomed them as peaceful neighbors 6,000 years ago. We never asked where they came from. We never asked what they had survived. She looked at the empty display where Captain Akono's face had been. We never understood that their peace was a choice, not a nature. They chose to put down their weapons, but they never forgot how to use them. Eternal Vigil had been silent for 12,000 years, but now its story would echo across the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same. The truth revealed. The galaxy awakens. The news spread across the Galactic Concord like a shock wave through still water. Within days, every civilized world knew about the discovery of the Eternal Vigil. The story of Captain Akin Kwo and her crew became the most discussed topic in 6,000 years. Holographic broadcasts showed images of the ancient battle cruiser. News networks played portions of the captain's logs on continuous repeat. Historians argued about implications. Politicians debated responses, but mostly people watched in stunned silence as they learned the truth about a species they thought they understood. Commander Zelith found herself at the center of a storm she had never anticipated. The conquered High Council summoned her to present her findings in person. She stood before representatives of 47 species in the Grand Chamber, a vast hall where decisions affecting trillions of lives were made. The chamber fell silent as she activated her presentation. Members of the council, she began. For 6,000 years, we have classified humans as a level 4 species, peaceful, diplomatic, culturally rich but militarily insignificant. Our assessment was catastrophically incomplete. The hidden history the holographic display showed: Earth, a blue and green world circling a yellow star. This is the human home world. Zelith continued, we have always known basic facts about it: harsh climate, frequent natural disasters, and atmosphere rich in corrosive oxygen. What we never understood was how these conditions shaped the species that evolved there. She changed the display to show primitive humans hunting massive beasts across frozen plains. Humans evolved as persistent predators. They could not outrun their prey. They could not overpower it with strength. Instead, they chased it for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They won through sheer refusal to give up. Council members leaned forward, their attention complete. This pattern repeated throughout their history. When ice ages came, other species went extinct. Humans adapted. When diseases swept their populations, they studied and learned and developed medicine. When resources grew scarce, they innovated. Every challenge made them stronger. Every disaster taught them new skills. By the time they reached space, they had survived 10,000 years of constant adversity. The display shifted to show early human spacecraft, primitive rockets barely capable of escaping their gravity well. But humanity did not let primitive technology stop them. Zelith said they built space stations from converted weapons. They established moon bases with equipment designed for military purposes. They reached Mars using ships that had a 30% failure rate. They accepted casualties that would have ended any other species' space program, and continued anyway. The Great Migration. Zelith paused, letting the information settle. Then came the crisis that shaped modern humanity. 12,000 years ago, human scientists detected instability in their sun. Solar output was increasing. Within a century, Earth would become uninhabitable. The display showed a dying star and a planet slowly cooking beneath its radiation. Most species would have accepted extinction. Zelith said quietly, humans chose survival. They built a fleet of generation ships, not military vessels. Civilian transports designed to carry their entire species across the galaxy. To find new homes, the exodus took 50 years to organize. They evacuated 4 billion people. A Corvan counselor raised one of his 6 arms. 4 billion. That is impossible. The logistics alone would require resources beyond any single species. Zelith nodded. You are correct. It should have been impossible. Humans made it possible anyway. They converted their entire industrial capacity to ship construction. They rationed food, water, and living space to levels that would have caused riots. In any other society, they accepted that millions would die during the journey so that billions could survive. And they built the largest fleet in galactic history. The price of survival, the Display changed to show the Krell swarm. Mechanical entities of unknown origin, consuming everything in their path. Then the swarm found them. Zelith said the human fleet was massive but slow. The generation ships were not built for combat. They were floating cities, carrying entire populations. When the Krell attacked, humanity faced a choice: abandon the fleet and scatter with each ship fleeing alone, or stand and fight. She paused. They chose to fight, but they knew they could not win a conventional battle, so they did something unprecedented. They separated their military vessels from the civilian fleet. Each warship was assigned to protect the convoy. Orders were simple: get the civilians to safety no matter the cost. The council chamber was absolutely silent. The eternal vigil was one of 300 warships that made this sacrifice. Zelith continued. Each one faced impossible odds. Each one fought alone against an enemy that outnumbered them hundreds to one. Each one was expected to die, and they accepted this. They chose certain death so that strangers could live. The display showed Captain Akono's face, her tired eyes looking out at the assembled council. This woman fought for 12 years. Her crew dwindled from 2,000 to 0. Her ship was destroyed piece by piece, but she never retreated. She never abandoned her convoy. When the final battle came, she had 3 working weapons and 2 hours of power. She attacked a dreadnought that outmaster ship 50 to 1, and she won. The silent heroes, a Valyri counselor, spoke, her voice shaking slightly. You said 300 warships made the sacrifice. What happened to the others? Zelith met her eyes. We found records in the Eternal Vigil's database, casualty reports from other vessels in the fleet. Of the 300 warships that escorted the civilian convoys, 17 survived. 17. The rest fought until they were destroyed. Every single one completed its mission. Every convoy reached safety. 4 billion humans survived because 300 ships refused to break. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. The council members looked at each other, then back at Zelith. A tavern counselor, one of Zelith's own species, stood slowly. Commander, what happened after the Exodus? How did humans rebuild? Where are the descendants of those 4 billion refugees? Zelith smiled sadly. That is perhaps the most remarkable part of this story. The survivors spread across 600 colony worlds. They rebuilt their civilization from scratch. Within 2,000 years, they had established a new federation. They developed faster than light travel. They explored neighboring space, and then 6,000 years ago, they found us. The choice of peace. The display showed the first contact between humans and the galactic conquered. A small human diplomatic vessel approaching a tavern station. When humans discovered the conquered, they could have arrived as conquerors. Zelith said their military technology was already advanced. Their population numbered in the trillions. They had proven they could win against impossible odds. Instead, they came in peace. They requested membership in the conquered, not as warriors, but as friends. She paused. We welcomed them. We classified them as peaceful. We thought that was their nature. We were wrong. Peace is not their nature. Peace is their choice. A Koran counselor stood abruptly. Are you suggesting humans have been deceiving us, that they are threat? Zealous shook her head firmly. No, counselor, I am suggesting we have fundamentally misunderstood them. Humans chose peace because they understand the cost of war better than any species in This chamber, they have paid that price. In blood across 12,000 years. When they joined the conquered, they made a conscious decision to be something different than what they had been forced to become. The display showed modern humans, teachers, artists, merchants, scientists living peaceful lives across 1,000 worlds. These people are the descendants of warriors who died to protect strangers. Zelith said that heritage never left them, it simply sleeps. They remember what their ancestors sacrificed, they remember what they are capable of, and they choose every day to be better than their history would suggest. The revelation spreads. The council session lasted 14 hours. Questions came from every species. Concerns were raised. Historical records were examined, but slowly a consensus emerged. The conquered's understanding of humanity needed to be revised, not because humans were dangerous, but because they had been drastically underestimated. In the weeks that followed, human history became the most studied subject in the galaxy. Universities offered new courses, documentaries were produced. The site where the Eternal Vigil was discovered became a memorial. Species from across the conquered came to see the ancient battle cruiser and honor the crew who had died at their post 12,000 years ago. But the real change happened in how other species looked at the humans living among them. The friendly merchant who sold textiles at the market, the teacher who worked with alien children at the intercultural school, the engineer who maintained life support systems on the space station. People began to wonder what stories did their ancestors carry, what sacrifices had been made so they could exist. Commander Zelith watched these changes with satisfaction. She had returned to the Eternal Vigil many times since the initial discovery. The ship had been declared a protected historical site. Small crew maintained it, ensuring the remains of Captain Aeon Quo and her crew were treated with proper respect. Living legacy. One day Zelith received a message that a group wished to visit the memorial. They were humans, descendants of Convoy 7. Their ancestors had been among the 4 million souls that Captain Aeon Quo had died protecting. Zelith met them at the airlock. There were 30 of them, spanning 3 generations. The eldest was a woman named Sarah Chin, whose family line traced back to Lieutenant Chin, the weapons officer whose remains Zelith had found at his post. We wanted to see where they fought, Sarah said quietly. We have stories passed down through our families, stories about the Eternal Vigil and its crew, but we never knew the whole truth until you found the ship. Zelith led them through the corridors. She watched as they stopped at each station, reading the names of the fallen. She saw tears on faces, young and old. In the command center, Sarah stood before the captain's chair. For a long time, she did not speak. She simply placed her hand on the armrest where Captain Aeon Quo had sat for 12 years. Thank you, she finally whispered. Thank you for not giving up on us. The visit ended in the cargo bay that had been converted to a memorial hall. Plaques lined the walls bearing the names of every crew member who had served aboard the Eternal Vigil. 2,000 names, 2,000 people who had chosen to die so that strangers could live. Understanding at last, Sarah turned to Zelith. Commander, do you understand? Now understand what? Zelith asked. Why? We chose peace when we joined the conquered, Sarah said. We have been warriors. We have fought wars that lasted centuries. We have built weapons That could crack planets, we have proven. We can survive anything, but survival is not the same as living, she gestured at the memorial plaques these people gave. Everything so that we could have a chance at something better, so that our children could grow up in a galaxy where conflict was not the only option. When we found the conquered, we saw an opportunity to honor their sacrifice, not by continuing to be warriors, but by showing that their deaths meant something, that we could be more than survivors, we could be builders of peace. Zelith felt understanding wash over her like cool water. You do not fight because you have proven you do not need to fight. You have nothing left to prove. Sarah nodded. Exactly, we know what we are capable of. Every human child learns the stories of the great migration. We teach them about the 300 ships and the billions they saved. We remember, but we choose to remember not to glorify war, but to ensure we never forget its true cost. She looked back at the captain's chair. Captain Akono fought for 12 years so that her children could live in peace. We honor her by living that peace, by choosing diplomacy over conflict, by building instead of destroying. That is the real strength of humanity, Commander. Not that we can fight, but that we can choose not to. New understanding, the discovery of the eternal vigil changed the galactic conquered in ways both subtle and profound. Humans were no longer classified as a level 4 species. The Council created a new classification entirely, acknowledging that humanity's peaceful nature was a conscious choice, made from a position of strength rather than weakness. Military analysts studied the tactical logs from the Eternal Vigil, the innovations humans had developed during their 12-year battle, influenced defensive strategies across the conquered. Medical techniques preserved in the ship's database, advanced trauma care by decades, engineering principles that had kept the ship functioning long past its design limits were incorporated into new construction standards. But perhaps the most important change was in how species related to each other. The story of the 300 ships that had sacrificed themselves to protect civilians inspired new protocols for refugee protection. Concord established the Aenquo protocols, named after the captain, requiring that civilian populations always be protected during conflicts, no matter the cost. Species that had previously viewed humans as unremarkable began to see them as examples of what dedication and sacrifice could achieve. Young people across the galaxy adopted Captain Akono's final words as a personal motto. We held the line, we never broke, humanity endured. The captain's promise kept. Commander Zelith stood in her office aboard the Quantum Observer, looking at a holographic image of the Eternal Vigil. The ancient battle cruiser floated in space, illuminated by carefully placed lights that made its scarred hull visible against the darkness. It was no longer a forgotten relic. It was a symbol, a reminder that peace was not the absence of strength, but the choice to direct strength toward protection rather than destruction. Her communicator chimed, a message from the conquered High Council. They were commissioning a new class of hospital ships. The lead vessel would be named the Captain Talia Akinquo. It would be dedicated to protecting and healing, just as the captain had protected Convoy 7. The ship would carry medical supplies to disaster zones. It would evacuate populations threatened by natural disasters. It would embody the principle That strength existed to preserve life. Not take it, Zelith smiled. Captain Akin. Quo had promised to get her convoy to safety. She had succeeded, but her promise had meant more than simply completing a mission. She had promised that humanity would endure, that her sacrifice would mean something, that the children she would never see grow up would live in a better galaxy. 12,000 years later, that promise had been kept. The galaxy had learned the truth about humanity. Not that they were warriors, though they had proven they could fight with unmatched determination. Not that they were powerful, though they had demonstrated strength beyond measure. The truth was simpler and more profound. Humanity had survived by refusing to accept defeat. They had thrived by choosing to protect the weak. They had joined the conquered not as conquerors, but as guardians, bringing with them a lesson learned through millennia of struggle. That true strength was measured not in the ability to destroy, but in the will to preserve. That the greatest victory was not defeating an enemy, but ensuring that future generations would never have to fight the same battles. The echo across time, the eternal vigil, remained in the forgotten expanse, a monument to sacrifice and determination, but its story traveled across the galaxy, carried by billions of voices. Children learned about Captain Akin Quo in schools. Her image appeared in museums. Her words were quoted in council chambers when difficult decisions needed to be made, and somewhere in the vast network of human colonies spread across 600 worlds, the descendants of Convoy 7 lived their lives. They raised families. They built communities. They created art and music and literature. They explored new worlds and made new discoveries. They lived in peace, just as Captain Yango had dreamed they would. Each of them carried the knowledge that they existed because 300 ships had refused to abandon their duty, because 2,000 crew members had stayed at their posts until the very end, because one captain had looked at impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. The galaxy had learned the truth. Humanity's peace was not weakness, it was the deliberate choice of a species that understood war's true cost and had decided to pay it so that others would not have to. It was the legacy of warriors who had fought so that their descendants could be something other than warriors. It was the promise kept across 12,000 years that humanity would endure, that they would hold the line, that they would never break. And in the cold darkness of the forgotten expanse, the eternal vigil kept its eternal watch, silent now but speaking volumes through its presence, a reminder that the greatest battles are fought not for glory or conquest, but for the simple right of others to live in peace. The galaxy had learned, and the galaxy would remember. The end.